South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on Fox News explained why she'll continue supporting the Lone Star State.
Governor Abbott has done the exact right thing, and I'll drive him more razor wire from South Dakota if I have to for him to do his job. We will be Europe within a year or two if we allow President Biden to continue this invasion of our country. Over 6 million people have come here illegally. It is time to stand our ground, and we'll be down there standing shoulder to shoulder with Governor Abbott.
25 Republican governors releasing a joint statement in support of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. They say the federal government is failing to protect the border, which is why Texas now has to step up.
This comes after Abbott officially announced he will not follow the Biden administration's request to vacate the border. Instead, he's claiming the state's constitutional right to defend itself against an invasion. In response, some Democrats have called on Biden to seize control of the Texas National Guard.
Former President Trump is also weighing in on the issue. He said other states should now send their National Guardsmen to Texas. That's to prevent the entry of illegal immigrants and to remove them and send them back across the border.
Trump said Texas rightly invoked the invasion clause and that current immigration numbers are posing a risk to national security, public safety, and public health. He also called on the American people to support Texas.
$10 million. That's the amount Seattle has agreed to pay 50 Black Lives Matter demonstrators to settle a lawsuit.
Good job.
The plaintiffs accused the police department of using excessive force during the 2020 riots. They were among tens of thousands of people who gathered downtown and in the Capitol Hill area for weeks after the death of George Floyd. During this time, protesters set up the Capitol Hill Occupied protest, taking control of a 6-block zone. To break up the crowds, police used things like flashbang grenades, foam-tipped projectiles, and blast balls that explode and release pepper gas. The city acknowledged no wrongdoing, but said the case was a significant drain on resources.
Harsher penalties for crimes in Kentucky. The state's House advanced a bill that would put repeat offenders behind bars for the rest of their lives. House Bill 5 would require life in prison without the possibility of parole for committing 3 violent felonies in Kentucky. The bill also aims to crack down on fentanyl dealers who contribute to overdose deaths. It would allow for the death penalty or life in prison without parole for knowingly selling fentanyl if it results in a fatal overdose. The bill is now heading to the Republican-led state Senate. It's part of a sweeping plan to combat crime.
Newly released documents show the National Security Agency buys internet data of Americans without warrants. The disclosure came from recent, newly unclassified letters made public by Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon.
The officials say
yeah,
the
I've
NSA
been knowing
has been
that.
buying web browsing data from commercial data brokers, including information about the websites Americans visit and the apps they use.
Paul Nakaso, the NSA's director at the time, wrote the data does not contain the content of communications. And he said the NSA does not buy cell phone location data or location data generated by car infotainment systems in the U.S.
The NSA confirmed in a statement it buys data from private vendors.
And Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign is launching
Private
a physical
vendors. Who are
workout
those
challenge for
private
voters.
vendors?
This is in response to concerns over President Biden and former President Trump's advanced age.
American Values 2024, a super PAC supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is promoting a workout challenge for voters. The goal is to have a healthier America and get Americans to be active for at least 24 minutes a day in 2024. Kennedy is known for being public about his physical workouts. This is while President Biden and former President Trump face criticisms over their advanced age and mental wellness. Recently on the campaign trail, Trump mixed up the names of his GOP challenger Nikki Haley and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This led Haley to question Trump's mental fitness. Haley has advocated for mental competency tests for older politicians.
He said multiple times that he ran against President Obama. He didn't run against President Obama. These things happen because guess what? When you're 80, that's what happens. You're just not as sharp as you used to be.
Trump responded to the criticism, saying that his mind is stronger now than it was 25 years ago, when he was Haley's age, 52.
But a few months ago, I took a cognitive test my doctor gave me. I said, give me a cognitive test just so we can, because you know what the standards were. And I aced it. I also took one when I was in But I also took one when I was in the White House.
Kennedy is 70 years old, while Trump is 77, and Biden is 81. Throughout his presidency, Biden has faced criticisms over his age and mental fitness following gaffes on camera.
A contingent election is what happens when no candidate gets a majority in the Electoral College. In this situation, the House of Representatives decides who becomes president, and it's only happened 3 times in American history. Could this be a viable path to the White House in 2024 for independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Earlier, I spoke with Epoch Times reporter Jeff Louderback to find out more. Jeff, thank you for joining us on NTD. Now, presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running as an independent, and he's hoping for an outright win, as you reported. Now, but there seems to be an alternative path to becoming president. Break that down for us.
Well, ideally, he wants to take the traditional route, which is getting or surpassing 270 electoral votes. That's a challenge when you're an independent. The only independent president technically we've had in American history is George Washington, and that's what RFK Jr. referenced, George Washington, when he declared as an independent back on October 9th. The other route that hasn't happened since 1825 is called a contingent election, and that's when no candidate reaches 270 electoral votes. It goes to the House of Representatives in each state, so there's 50 states that get 1 vote each.
So this strategy to capture enough electoral votes to send to the House, how likely is it to happen again, according to strategists?
Well, most consultants and strategists say that's very. They point to the fact that, and I don't know off the top of my head right now, but I believe Republicans have maybe 4 more states than Democrats, and so they think that they would vote for either, each state would vote for the Republican or the Democrat. So in this case, Donald Trump, the likely nominee, and if Joe Biden is the likely nominee for the Democrats, it would be one or the other. But the RFK Jr. campaign believes that because he's getting support from conservatives and moderate Democrats alike and independents, that he could be considered the compromise candidate.
So, I mean, about that, what's the prospect of RFK Jr. becoming president when, in comparison to former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden?
Well, as RFK Jr. points out at his voter rallies and his fundraisers, if Trump and Biden are the nominees, they don't have to. They're already on the ballot, and they have abundant funding from all sorts of entities. And as far as RFK Jr., first he's trying to get on all 50 states ballots and the District of Columbia. So that's a challenge in itself. He believes estimates $15 to $18 million. And then there's likely lawsuits to follow by Democrats and Republicans trying to keep him off the ballot. So he has a lot of challenges that even to get to the general election.
Jeff, please tell us about the last 2 times when a contingent election happened in U.S. history.
Well, you have to be a history enthusiast and go way back to the 19th century for that. In 1800, it happened between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. And Aaron Burr is more well known for his duel with Alexander Hamilton. That contingent election went to Thomas Jefferson, and it took a long time for that to happen. And then 1824, it happened once again. It was decided in January 1825, and that's John Quincy Adams who became president. It's interesting because if you look back in the history of independents and third parties running, the last candidate to get electoral votes was George Wallace in 1968. So if this is going to happen for RFK Jr., if he takes that route, it'll definitely be history in the making.
All right, Jeff Louderback, national reporter with the Epoch Times. Thank you so much for joining me.
Retaliation against U.S. lawmakers.
The report comes from the Director of National Intelligence. It was published last December. Let's take a closer look.
It said during the 2022 U.S. elections, Chinese intelligence tried to undermine or promote candidates from both political parties. Examples include slandering a U.S. senator online using inauthentic accounts. The report also mentioned media reports of Chinese propaganda arm using TikTok to target candidates from both parties. Their content was able to rack up tens of millions of views in the U.S. The effort has been years in the making. 4 years ago, Beijing ordered officials to ramp up efforts to influence U.S. policy and sway American public opinion in China's favor. The report assesses Chinese officials had more room to operate ahead of the midterms, probably because they didn't expect the Biden administration to retaliate as severely as feared in 2020. Congress is a prime target. The report said in 2021, Beijing identified lawmakers to either punish them for their anti-China views or reward them for supporting Beijing. Congress remains a thorn in the side of the Chinese regime. Beijing sees both chambers as the center of anti-CCP activities. Chinese cyber actors also scan over 100 U.S. state and national political party domains. A report from Microsoft found Chinese hackers posed as American voters online. They used artificial intelligence to promote divisive content during the 2022 midterm elections.
Another foreigner sent to prison in China. British businessman Ian Stones was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. The sentence was handed down last year, but Beijing just confirmed the news today.
Stones is around 70 years old and has worked in China for decades. He's been detained there since 2018 on charges of illegally selling intelligence to overseas parties. Beijing did not give details about the charges.
Beijing has detained a number of foreigners, including Americans. American businessman Mark Swadan, accused of trafficking drugs, is now on death row. Also behind bars is Pastor David Lin and Kai Li, a naturalized U.S. citizen born in China.
Beijing's anti-espionage law that took effect last year is making things more complicated. The new law expands the scope of what Beijing considers espionage, but without clearly defining the terms, leaving many concerned it could apply to regular business activities. Normal actions such as collecting intelligence on local markets and business competitors may no longer be safe.
The law also hands Chinese authorities greater power. They can block suspects from leaving China. They can also search suspects' bags, electronic devices, and property.
The U.S. State Department has asked citizens to reconsider travel to China due to the risk of arbitrary detention. Turning to Taiwan, new recruits are kicking off their year-long compulsory military service. Taiwan recently extended its conscription period in response to threats from Beijing. Here's more.
Taiwan's military has begun welcoming its newest batch of conscripts. But unlike those who came before, who served 4 months, these young people will spend a year in training. The extension was announced in late 2022 by Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and comes in response to the government's concerns about China's military threat. In recent years, China has ramped up military, diplomatic, and economic pressure on Taiwan to assert its sovereignty claim. That has included almost daily Chinese Air Force missions near the island over the last 4 years. Taiwan's army expects a total of 670 conscripts to join the first batch under the newly extended scheme. One such recruit is 18-year-old Ying Xingxi, who is being dropped off by his parents.
I'm a little bit excited. This is compulsory service, and after I complete it, it will not hamper my plans to pursue higher education or a job search. Compared to 4 months of service, I think I can learn a lot more through serving for 1 year, and it will help me to hone the skills. For the country, it will provide the needed defense power given that our neighboring country is a big threat to our nation. I'm sure it will be helpful.
Once the conscripts have had their papers checked and their hair shaved, they will begin intense training. That includes shooting exercises, combat instruction used by US forces, and operating powerful weapons such as Stinger anti-aircraft missiles and anti-tank missiles. The United States, Taiwan's most important international backer and arms seller, despite the lack of formal diplomatic ties, has welcomed the conscription reform. Yet the period of service in Taiwan is still shorter than the 18 months mandated in South Korea, which faces a hostile and nuclear-armed North Korea. A Taipei-based think tank previously estimated the extended conscription could add an extra 60 to 70,000 manpower annually to the current 165,000 strong professional force in 2027 and beyond. After Taiwan announced the extension, China criticized the move for seeking to use the Taiwanese people as a cannon fodder. Taiwan's government rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims and says only the Taiwanese people can decide their future.
This week, the U.S. Navy sailed its first warship through the Taiwan Strait since the island's presidential election. China has protested the move, calling it proactive. To learn more about where things stand between the U.S., China, and Taiwan, earlier I spoke with Colonel Grant Newsham, Senior Fellow at the Center for Security Policy and author of When China Attacks. Colonel Grant Newsham, thank you for joining us. Now, the Chinese regime has accused the U.S. of, quote, trouble and provocation after the U.S. Navy sailed a warship into the Taiwan Strait. What do you make of this?
Well, they've been saying this forever. They've been complaining vociferously about these sorts of naval movements for at least 25 years that I can remember. They make the complaints, and they'll keep making them the next time we do it. For now, there isn't a whole lot they can do to stop them. And that's mostly because they're afraid of the damage they would suffer elsewhere, say to their international trade, imports of fuel and food, to which they're very vulnerable. That's the state of affairs for now. Play this out into the future, and at some point they just may feel like they've got the upper hand and that it will be worth actually doing something to a U.S. ship. But for now, it's just words.
I understand you have a background in Asia-Pacific defense. Now, what's the general situation between Taiwan and the Chinese Communist Party, also considering that Taiwan had an election unfavorable to the Chinese regime?
Well, the Chinese Communists have been very clear about what they intend to do, and that is to take Taiwan, either by force or to use pressure to have Taiwan just come into the fold. And I think they know as a result of this election that there is no chance they are ever going to get Taiwan to voluntarily join the People's Republic of China. It's just headed off on a different tangent. These are Taiwanese people that want to be free. So that puts China in a position of either, once again, using force or else just stepping up the coercion to the point that Taiwan has to come in. And as importantly, they're counting on an American administration not defending Taiwan the way that it should.
Now, a new survey of leading experts from the U.S. and Taiwan from the Center for Strategic and International Studies cast doubt on China's ability to invade Taiwan with its current military strength. What's your assessment of the CCP's military strength and ability to invade?
I think they've got the ability to launch an all-out attack on Taiwan and to think that they have reasonable prospects for success. I am aware of that CSIS report. Now, if you look at the people on it, there's 50-some. There's maybe 6 or 7 who say would have a different opinion. They've chosen people that are going to say, well, Taiwan can't be attacked. The Chinese don't want to. If they'd added some names to that survey, it would have been a more balanced, I think, more accurate survey.
Now, there's another, in other recent reports, CCP leader Xi Jinping has been purging leaders in its own military, the People's Liberation Army, because of rampant corruption. Could this impact China's ability to invade or win a war?
Oh, it could, but there's different ways to look at it. I would tend to see that he's actually going to end up with a PLA that is more capable and that is more able to fight a war and to attack Taiwan. Knowing a little history helps. In the 30s, Hitler did the same thing with the Wehrmacht, and people said the same thing, oh, they could never attack anyone now. Well, it turns out they were wrong. In this case, he's getting rid of some dead wood, replacing them with people he can trust and he thinks are better. But also he's not having any sort of harm, doing any harm, really to the lower levels where the actual work is done in a military. So I would not count on this as giving us any sort of leeway or any sort of breathing room in terms of Chinese capabilities towards Taiwan.
Colonel Grant Newsham, Senior Fellow with the Center for Security Policy, thank you so much for your insight and for joining us.
My pleasure.
Redirected traffic to investigate the vehicle. A heavy police presence is seen at the site. Officers cordoned off the area with police tape, causing disruption for commuters.
The burgundy-colored vehicle was later moved away. The cause of the incident remains unknown. We'll keep you updated on that situation. And happening right now, a Hunter Biden business associate is testifying in Congress.
Rob Walker is appearing for a transcribed interview behind closed doors.
He's testifying before lawmakers from the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees. This comes as part of the House impeachment inquiry into President Biden.
GOP committee leaders say Walker was, quote, used as a vehicle to receive foreign funds and send a percentage of the money to Biden's family members.
The lawmakers say Walker was able to do that through his company, Robinson Walker, LLC.
Walker is accused of sending millions to the Biden family from a Romanian businessman and a Chinese energy company.
And over to the border showdown, where tensions between the federal government and the state of Texas keep rising. More and more Republican governors from across the nation now say they stand behind Texas in its battle against the Biden administration. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on Fox News explained why she'll continue supporting the Lone Star State.
Governor Abbott has done the exact right thing, and I'll drive him more razor wire from South Dakota if I have to for him to do his job. We will be Europe within a year or two if we allow President Biden to continue this invasion of our country. Over 6 million people have come here illegally. It is time to stand our ground, and we'll be down there standing shoulder to shoulder with Governor Abbott.
25 Republican governors releasing a joint statement in support of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. They say the federal government is failing to protect the border, which is why Texas now has to step up.
This comes after Abbott officially announced he will not follow the Biden administration's request to vacate the border. Instead, he's claiming the state's constitutional right to defend itself against an invasion. In response, some Democrats have called on Biden to seize control of the Texas National Guard.
The former President Trump is also weighing in on the issue. He said other states should now send their National Guardsmen to Texas. That's to prevent the entry of illegal immigrants and to remove them and send them back across the border.
Trump said Texas rightly invoked the invasion clause and that current immigration numbers are posing a risk to national security, public safety, and public health. He also called on the American people to support Texas.
And the United Nations top court has issued an interim ruling in the case against Israel. South Africa is accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza and asks the International Court of Justice to order a ceasefire.
By 15 votes to 2, the State of Israel shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to the Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power.
They locked the door, and I have a very big armchair in the corner, and they put the armchair to the door, and we all went into the shelter. I sleep in the shelter.
Ahead of International Holocaust Memorial Day, they were reunited for the first time. Ilya Pizatzkov recalls the chaos as Hamas terrorists attacked the music festival.
We start to hear gunshots, right? We're right next to a car. We start to hear the gunshots, and we laid under the car, right? So the gunshots were coming from everywhere.
Pizatzkov and his friends drove to Sa'ad, a nearby kibbutz. They managed to evade Hamas ambushes as they passed bodies strewn along the road.
We need to get out of here. We cannot stay here. There are gunshots from all over. So we said 1, 2, 3. Then we jumped to the car, started driving. And when we started driving, we saw a grenade which fell literally several meters from us.
Jackson was 4 years old when World War II started. Her family went into hiding in Siberia. After years of displacement, they decided to immigrate to Israel in 1949.
Pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside of the World Court in the Netherlands on Friday. and pro-Israeli demonstrators did the same as they awaited the court's ruling on the genocide case brought against Israel by South Africa. And then the International Court of Justice issued its ruling.
The court considers that, with regard to the present situation, Israel must, in accordance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention.
Friday's ruling was an interim one and did not say whether or not genocide occurred. It could take years for the court to examine all aspects of the case. With this ruling, the court ordered Israel to take measures to prevent genocide in its war against Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. The court also said that Israel must take action to improve the humanitarian aid situation in the Gaza Strip. Israel must report back to the court within a month on the steps it's taken to implement these steps. The court did not call for a ceasefire, something South Africa had asked for. And in South Africa, the African National Congress celebrated the court's ruling. South Africa's president said this:
"The effect of the order that the ICJ has granted today is that there is a plausible case of genocide. This marks an important first in our quest to secure justice for the people of Gaza."
The Israeli prime minister also gave his reaction.
The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians. We will continue to facilitate humanitarian assistance and to do our utmost to keep civilians out of harm's way, even as Hamas uses civilians as human shields.
And a student in Tel Aviv shared her thoughts.
I think that the pressure needs to be put on Hamas. They're the one with the hostages.
And this man in the Gaza Strip had different concerns.
We were hoping for the ICJ to immediately end the war, to spare the blood of those who are alive.
Meanwhile, in another development, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency on Friday said it suspects that several of its own staff were involved in the October 7th terrorist attacks in Israel. In response, the U.S. State Department paused additional funding for the United Nations agency until the matter is investigated. Jason Perry, NTD News.